I'm Ella Keith, 32, and I built my entire career from discipline, grit, and staying quiet about the things I've actually done. For years, I showed up for my family, covered for them, supported them, kept my uniformed life separate so they wouldn't have to worry. But when they publicly dismissed everything I'd earned, when they called me a failure at my own sister's engagement dinner, I made a decision that shifted the entire room. Have you ever been written off by people you would have gone to war for? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before we get into what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to hold your ground after being disrespected, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, consequences, and taking your power back. What happened next? Even I didn't see coming. I grew up believing my family knew me. That's the kind of assumption children make, the one that takes years to disprove. My name is Ella Keith, and for most of my life, I existed in two versions, the one my family saw and the one I actually was. The gap between those two versions didn't matter much when I was young. It matters now. My sister Lila's engagement dinner was scheduled for 1800 hours on a Saturday in April. The invitation arrived 11 days before the event, forwarded through my mother's email with a subject line that read FYI. No note. No explanation for why a printed invitation hadn't been mailed to my address like everyone else's. I opened the attachment and saw my name listed under family in a font 2 points smaller than the others. Small details tell you everything if you're trained to notice them. I was finishing a training cycle at the time, which meant my schedule ran on a grid that didn't flex for last-minute social obligations. But I made it work. I always made it work. That's what they never understood about the military. It's not about having free time, it's about managing constraints. I submitted leave paperwork, arranged coverage for my duties, and confirmed my attendance in a reply-all email that went unanswered. My mother called 2 days later to ask if I'd received the invitation. I told her I'd already responded. She said, "Oh, I didn't see that," and moved on to discussing Lila's registry. The venue was a private event space downtown, the kind with exposed brick and Edison bulbs that photographs well. I arrived at 17:45 in a navy dress and low heels, professional but appropriate for the occasion. The parking lot was already full. Inside, round tables were draped in ivory linens, centerpieces arranged with white roses and eucalyptus. My mother stood near the entrance greeting guests, wearing a champagne-colored dress and the smile she reserved for public events. She hugged me briefly, her hands light on my shoulders, and said, "You made it." Not, "I'm glad you're here." Just acknowledgement of arrival, the way you'd confirm a delivery. My father, Colonel Richard Keith, was holding court near the bar. Retired now, but he'd never stopped wearing the rank like a name tag. He saw me, nodded once, and returned to his conversation. That was standard. My father had two modes, dismissive and absent. I'd stopped expecting warmth from him around the same time I stopped expecting him to remember my promotion dates. Lila was at the center of the room, luminous in a white cocktail dress, her hand resting on her fiancé's arm. Daniel Foster. I'd met him twice before, both times briefly. He was Army, a captain, which I knew from context clues rather than direct conversation. Lila didn't talk much about his career, and I didn't ask. It wasn't my business, and she didn't ask about mine. I found my seat at a table near the back, sandwiched between a cousin I hadn't seen in 5 years and one of Lila's college friends. The cousin, Jen, smiled politely and asked what I'd been up to. I gave her the short version. Still active duty, still stationed nearby, staying busy. She nodded, her eyes already drifting toward the head table. "That's great," she said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Lila's friend didn't ask me anything at all. The dinner began with speeches. My mother stood first, welcoming everyone and thanking them for celebrating this beautiful milestone in Lila's life. She spoke about Lila's accomplishments, her career in marketing, her taste, her kindness. She thanked my father for his support. She thanked Daniel's parents, who'd flown in from Virginia. She thanked the event planner, the caterer, the florist. She did not mention me. It wasn't an oversight. I knew that even before my father stood to speak. He kept his remarks brief, touching on Lila's childhood, her determination, her success. "We couldn't be prouder," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative cadence he'd never lost. He raised his glass. "To Lila and Daniel." The room echoed the toast. I lifted my glass with everyone else, the motion automatic. Lila spoke next, her voice bright and confident. She thanked her parents, her friends, her bridesmaids. She listed them by name, pausing for effect after each one. She thanked Daniel's family. She thanked the guests for coming. She thanked the venue. She did not thank me. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my expression neutral. This was a skill I developed over years of training, the ability to absorb information without reacting to it. They teach you that early. You learn to control your face, your breathing, your posture. You learn that emotion is data, not direction. The meal was served. Jen made small talk about her job in pharmaceutical sales. Lila's friend talked about a vacation she was planning. I answered when spoken to, asked appropriate follow-up questions, and kept my tone light. No one asked about my work. No one asked about my life. I wasn't surprised. This was the pattern we'd established over years. I showed up, I participated, and I existed in the margins of their attention. Between courses, my mother's sister, Aunt Diane, stopped by the table. She leaned down, her hand on the back of my chair, and said, "Ella, sweetheart, are you still doing that military thing?" Her tone was gentle, almost pitying. I looked up at her and said, "Yes, I'm still active duty." She nodded slowly, the way you'd acknowledge someone's unfortunate circumstances. "Well," she said, "it's good to have hobbies." She patted my shoulder and moved on before I could respond. Hobbies. I turned the word over in my mind, testing it against the reality of my last deployment, the missions I'd planned, the decisions I'd made that kept people alive. A hobby. I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. My cousin Jen glanced at me, her expression uncertain, but she didn't say anything. No one ever did. By the time dessert was served, I'd counted 3 separate conversations within earshot that referenced my career, none of them accurate. One guest, a family friend I vaguely remembered from childhood, asked my father if I'd ever made it past basic training. My father laughed, not unkindly, and said, "She's been in for a while now." That was the entirety of his defense. The guest nodded and said, "Good for her." The phrase hung in the air, patronizing and hollow. I didn't correct them. Correction required an invitation to speak, and I hadn't been given one. So I stayed quiet, observing, cataloging. This was information. This was data. I'd process it later, the way I always did, once I was alone and the operational environment had shifted. For now, I remained present, professional, and perfectly composed. That's what they never understood. Silence isn't the same as absence. I was paying attention to everything. The dinner was scheduled to end at 2100 hours, but by 2000 hours, most of the guests had shifted into smaller clusters, talking and laughing. I could have left then. No one would have noticed. But I stayed because leaving early would have been an admission of something, and I wasn't ready to admit anything yet. So I sat at my table, watching my sister glow at the center of the room, and wondered when exactly I'd become invisible to the people who were supposed to know me best. The real cruelty came after the cake. Not during, when everyone was focused on Lila cutting the first slice, while Daniel's hand covered hers, both of them smiling for the photographer. Not during the applause or the toasts that followed. It came in the quiet lull after, when people had returned to their seats and the noise level had dropped just enough for individual conversations to become audible again. My father stood, still holding his champagne flute, and cleared his throat. The room quieted. He wasn't done talking. "Before we wrap up," he said, his voice carrying that command presence that people either respected or resented, "I want to add one more thing." He looked at Lila, his expression warm in a way I hadn't seen him direct at anyone in years. "Your mother and I are proud of you. You've built a real career, made something of yourself. You didn't take the easy path, and that matters." The implication was clear, even if he didn't say my name. The easy path. I felt Jen shift uncomfortably beside me. Lila smiled, her cheeks flushed from attention and champagne. My mother nodded, Her hand pressed to her chest in that gesture of maternal pride she'd perfected. Daniel watched my father carefully, his expression unreadable. Then someone, one of my father's old colleagues, raised his glass and said, "Here's to success." The room echoed it. I didn't. I kept my glass on the table, my hands in my lap. No one noticed. After the toast dissolved into smaller conversations, one of Daniel's relatives, an older man in a gray suit, approached our table. He'd been introduced earlier as Daniel's uncle, a retired Navy officer. He looked at me with polite interest and said, "Ella, right? Richard mentioned you're in the service too." As if it were an afterthought. I nodded. "Air Force," I said. "Active duty." He smiled. "What do you do?" It was a fair question. I gave him the answer I always gave civilians: operations and logistics. He nodded, already losing interest. "Did you ever get promoted?" The question landed like a brick. I kept my face neutral. "Yes," I said. "I'm a captain." He looked surprised, then skeptical. "Really? How long have you been in?" 9 years, I said. He frowned slightly, doing the math, and I could see him trying to reconcile the rank with the timeline. He couldn't. The numbers didn't match his assumptions, so he dismissed them. "Well," he said, "good for you." He moved on. "Good for you." The same phrase, repeated like a script. I realized then that no one in this room believed I'd accomplished anything. They didn't disbelieve it out of malice. They simply hadn't bothered to find out. The difference was important. My mother appeared at my side a few minutes later, her smile tight. "Ella, you've been so quiet tonight." It wasn't concern. It was a reprimand. I looked up at her. I didn't have much to say. She frowned. "You could try engaging." "This is Lila's night." As if I'd been the one monopolizing attention. As if I'd been the one steering every conversation back to myself. I didn't respond. She sighed, a soft sound of disappointment, and walked away. Lila found me near the end of the evening, her face flushed and happy. "Thanks for coming," she said, her tone distracted. She was already looking past me, toward Daniel, who was talking with his parents. "Of course," I said. She hesitated, then added, "I know you're busy with your thing." "Your thing." "Not your career. Not your work. Your thing." I nodded. "Yeah." She smiled, squeezed my arm briefly, and moved away. I stayed until 21:30 hours, longer than I needed to. I congratulated Daniel's parents, thanked the hosts, and said goodbye to the handful of relatives who acknowledged me. My father was still at the bar, laughing with his old colleagues. I didn't approach him. My mother was near the exit, talking with the event planner. She glanced at me as I passed and said, "Drive safe." I told her I would. The parking lot was nearly empty. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the silence settle. This was the part they didn't prepare you for in training: how to handle the moment when you realize that respect isn't reciprocal, that effort isn't always recognized, that love doesn't guarantee understanding. The Air Force taught me how to plan missions, manage crises, and lead teams. It didn't teach me how to sit at a table with my own family and feel like a stranger. I drove back to base, the highway empty and dark. My apartment was quiet when I got home, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate. I changed out of the dress, hung it in the closet, and sat on the edge of my bed. My phone buzzed once, a text from one of my team leads asking about a briefing scheduled for Monday. I replied, confirmed the time, and set the phone aside. That was the difference. At work, people knew what I did. They knew my rank, my responsibilities, my record. They didn't need to be convinced. They didn't need me to prove anything. The respect was already there, built into the structure, earned through performance. At home, with my family, I was still trying to prove I existed. I thought about Lila's toast, the way she thanked everyone except me. I thought about my father's comments, the way he'd praised her success and implied mine didn't measure up. I thought about my mother's disappointment, Aunt Diane's pity, the uncle's skepticism. I thought about all of it, and I realized something I should have understood years ago: they didn't know me because they'd never tried to. This wasn't a gap I could close by showing up more often or explaining myself better. This was a choice they'd made, consciously or not, to see me as less than I was. And I was done trying to correct them. I wasn't always the serious one. That's what people forget, or maybe they never knew. When Lila and I were kids, I was the one who climbed trees, who convinced her to sneak out after bedtime to catch fireflies in the backyard. I was the one who told stories, who made her laugh until she couldn't breathe. We were close then, the way sisters are supposed to be. She looked up to me. I looked out for her. The shift started small. It always does. I was 12 when I joined the Civil Air Patrol, drawn to the structure and the challenge. Lila was 9, still young enough that her interests shifted weekly. I spent weekends at CAP meetings, learning drill commands and navigation, while she took dance classes and piano lessons. My parents didn't discourage me, but they didn't encourage me either. My father would nod when I told him about new achievements, but his attention always drifted back to his work. My mother smiled and said, "That's nice, sweetheart," and then asked if I'd finished my homework. By high school, the divide was obvious. I joined ROTC, committed to a military path that felt inevitable by then. Lila joined student government, the debate team, the yearbook committee. She was popular in a way I wasn't. I didn't mind. I had my own circles, my own goals. But at family dinners, the conversation always tilted toward her accomplishments, her social life, her plans. When I mentioned ROTC events or leadership roles, my father would say, "Good," and change the subject. My mother would remind me not to get too serious, to make sure I had balance. Balance meant being more like Lila. I understood that without anyone saying it explicitly. I commissioned as a second lieutenant at 22, right out of college. It was a proud moment for me, standing in that uniform, taking the oath. My parents attended the ceremony. Lila didn't. She had finals. My father shook my hand afterward and said, "Don't mess it up." My mother hugged me and said, "We're proud of you," but her voice carried the same distracted tone it always did when discussing my career. They left before the reception, citing a long drive home. I told myself it was fine. They'd been there. That was enough. My first assignment was at a stateside base, operations support for a logistics squadron. I was young, eager, and determined to prove myself. I made first lieutenant within 2 years, ahead of schedule. I called my parents to tell them. My father said, "That's good. Keep your head down." My mother said, "That's wonderful, honey. Did you hear Lila got promoted at her firm?" She had. I congratulated her over email. She replied with a smiley face emoji. The pattern repeated with every subsequent promotion. Captain at 27, a rank that came with real responsibility, real authority. I led missions, managed teams, coordinated operations that required precision and trust. I earned my call sign, Reaper 6, during a joint training exercise that went sideways. The details are classified, but the short version is this. When the plan failed, I built a new one under pressure, coordinated assets across multiple units, and turned a disaster into a success. The call sign stuck. In the military, call signs mean something. They're not handed out for showing up. They're earned through performance, through moments that define you. I didn't tell my family about the call sign. They wouldn't have understood its significance. They barely understood my rank. Lila and I drifted further apart as adults. It wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no falling out. We just stopped being close. She got engaged, planned a wedding, built a life that didn't include me except in peripheral ways. I deployed, returned, deployed again. Our schedules didn't align. Our worlds didn't overlap. We'd text occasionally, surface-level exchanges about holidays or birthdays. She never asked about my work. I stopped asking about hers. The last time I saw her before the engagement dinner was at Christmas, 8 months prior. She was excited about Daniel, talking nonstop about their plans, their future, the ring he was going to buy. I listened, smiled, said the right things. When she finally paused and asked what I'd been up to, I mentioned a recent deployment. She nodded, her attention already drifting, and said, "That sounds intense." Then she changed the subject. That was when I knew. Not that she didn't care exactly, but that she didn't see my life as real in the way hers was. My career was abstract to her, something that happened in the background, disconnected from the tangible markers of success she understood. Jobs, promotions, relationships, weddings, those were real. What I did was other. My parents reinforced that perception. When Lila announced her engagement, my mother called me immediately, breathless with excitement. When I made captain, I sent an email. My mother replied 3 days later, "Congratulations. We're so proud. See you at Thanksgiving." The difference in response times told me everything. I thought about all of this as I sat in my apartment the night of the engagement dinner, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the 12-year-old girl who climbed trees with her sister and the 31-year-old woman who sat alone at a table while that same sister thanked everyone but her. I thought about the gap between who I was and who they believed me to be, and I realized the gap wasn't closable. Not because I hadn't tried, but because they'd never asked me to explain. The bond we'd had as children was gone. I mourned it, briefly, the way you mourn anything you've lost without noticing. And then I let it go. You can't force people to see you. You can only decide whether their blindness is something you're willing to tolerate. I wasn't sure yet, but I was getting close to an answer. The morning after the engagement dinner, I woke at 0500 hours out of habit. My body doesn't wait for alarms anymore. I ran 6 miles, came back, showered, and made coffee. My phone had 2 missed calls from my mother and a text from Lila. "Thanks again for coming last night." I didn't reply immediately. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee, and tried to process what had happened. Processing is a technical term in the military. It means taking an event, stripping it of emotion, and analyzing it for actionable data. What happened? Why did it happen? What does it mean going forward? I applied that framework now because it was the only one I trusted. What happened? My family publicly dismissed my career, my accomplishments, and my presence. They did this in front of strangers, in front of Daniel's family, in front of me. They did it casually, without malice, as if it were fact. Why did it happen? Because they didn't know what I did. And they didn't know because they'd never asked. And they'd never asked because, on some level, they'd decided my career didn't matter enough to warrant their attention. What it meant going forward, I had a choice to make. I could continue showing up, continue participating in family events, continue existing in the margins of their awareness. I could keep trying to prove myself, keep hoping they'd eventually ask the right questions, keep waiting for recognition that might never come. Or I could stop. I could step back, establish boundaries, and let them exist in the version of my life they'd created, minimal, distant, polite. Neither option felt satisfying, but one felt honest. I replied to Lila's text, "Of course. Congrats again." She sent back a heart emoji. I set the phone down and stared at it, wondering if she had any idea how last night had felt. Probably not. That was the problem with being invisible. People don't realize when they're looking past you. I spent the rest of the weekend on base, catching up on work. There was always work. Briefings to prep, reports to file, personnel issues to manage. My team was solid, experienced, and I trusted them in a way I didn't trust much else. They knew my rank, my record, my capabilities. They didn't question whether I deserved to be there. They didn't ask if I'd ever been promoted. They knew. On Monday, during a staff meeting, one of my senior NCOs asked if I'd had a good weekend. I said it was fine. He didn't press. That was another thing I appreciated about the military. People respected boundaries. If you didn't want to talk about something, you didn't have to. No one took it personally. But the engagement dinner stayed with me. It played on a loop in the back of my mind, even as I worked through other tasks. I kept hearing my father's voice. She had promise. Didn't pan out. I kept seeing Lila's face as she thanked everyone but me. I kept feeling Aunt Diane's hand on my shoulder. It's good to have hobbies. The worst part wasn't the dismissal. It was the realization that this had been happening for years, and I'd been too busy, too focused, too hopeful to see it clearly. Every missed phone call, every distracted response, every conversation that pivoted away from my career, they were all data points. Together, they formed a pattern. My family didn't respect what I did because they didn't understand it. And they didn't understand it because they'd never tried to. I thought about calling my mother, trying to explain. But explain what? That their assumptions were wrong? That I'd built a career they couldn't see? That their ignorance hurt? None of those conversations would go well. She'd get defensive, insist they were proud of me, cite the times they'd shown up, commissioning, graduation, the occasional holiday visit. She'd reframe the narrative, make it about my sensitivity, my inability to let things go. I'd seen her do it before, with other conflicts, other disappointments. It was easier to adjust the story than to accept responsibility. So I didn't call. I didn't explain. I sat with the discomfort and let it clarify into something sharper, resolve. I wasn't going to argue for recognition I'd already earned. I wasn't going to justify my career to people who'd already decided it didn't matter. I was going to continue doing my job, excelling at it, and let the results speak for themselves. If they never understood, that was their loss, not mine. But there was still a part of me, small, stubborn, childish, that wanted them to know. Not for validation, exactly, but for accuracy. They'd built a story about me that wasn't true, and I wanted to correct the record. Not because I needed their approval, but because I needed them to stop lying about who I was. I didn't know how to make that happen without looking defensive. I didn't know how to assert the truth without seeming desperate for acknowledgement. So I stayed quiet, the way I'd been trained to, and waited. In the military, patience is a tactical advantage. You don't force a situation before it's ready. You wait for the right moment, the right opening. Then you move. I didn't know when that moment would come. But I knew it would. Things always come to a head eventually. People always reveal themselves, given enough time. And when they did, I'd be ready. For now, I focused on what I could control, my work, my team, my responsibilities. Those things were real. Those things mattered. And unlike my family, they didn't require me to prove my worth over and over again. They simply acknowledged it, respected it, and moved forward. That was enough. It had to be. The call came 3 weeks later. I was in a briefing, reviewing logistics for an upcoming training exercise, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, Lila. I ignored it. She called again during lunch. Then my mother called. Then Lila again. By the time I checked my messages, there were 5 missed calls and 3 texts. Lila, can you call me? Lila, it's about the wedding. Mom, Lila needs to talk to you. Please call her back. I stepped outside, found a quiet spot near the flight line, and called Lila. She answered on the first ring. Ella, thank God. I need your help. Her voice was high, frantic. I steadied myself. What's wrong? The wedding planner quit. Just quit. 3 months before the wedding. She sent an email this morning saying she's taking a leave of absence for personal reasons and referred us to someone else, but the other person can't take on a wedding this close to the date. I'm completely screwed. I waited. There had to be more. Lila didn't call me for emotional support. She called when she needed something practical. I need someone who's organized, she continued. Someone who can manage logistics, coordinate vendors, keep everything on track. You do that stuff all the time, right? With your job. There it was. I closed my eyes briefly, processing. She didn't know what my job entailed. She just knew it involved logistics. Close enough, in her mind, to wedding planning. Lila, I plan military operations. That's not the same as I know, but you're good at organizing things, right? Making schedules, managing people, solving problems? That's all this is. Please, Ella. I'm desperate. I thought about saying no. I had every reason to. She dismissed my career, ignored my presence, treated me like an afterthought. Now she wanted my help because it was convenient. The irony wasn't lost on me. But I also heard the genuine panic in her voice. And despite everything, she was still my sister. What exactly do you need? I asked. She exhaled, relief flooding her voice. Everything. I need someone to confirm vendor contracts, manage the timeline, coordinate with the venue, handle day of logistics. Basically, I need someone to be the wedding planner. I'll pay you. I'll pay whatever the planner was getting. I don't want your money. Then please just do it as a favor. Please. I was quiet for a long moment. Lila filled the silence. I know I haven't been. I know we're not as close as we used to be. But you're my sister. And you're the most competent person I know. That stung in a way I didn't expect. The most competent person she knew, but not someone whose career she'd bothered to learn about. Not someone she'd thanked at her engagement dinner. Just someone useful in a crisis. I'll think about it, I said. Ella, I need an answer soon. Like today. I'll call you back in 2 hours. I hung up before she could argue. I walked back to my office, sat down, and stared at the wall. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Not the one I'd expected, but an opening nonetheless. If I helped her, I'd be in the center of the wedding planning, coordinating with Daniel, interacting with my family in a context where my skills were undeniable. They'd see what I could do, how I operated, what I was capable of. It wouldn't be combat logistics, but the principles were the same: manage resources, anticipate problems, execute under pressure. Or I could say no. Establish a boundary. Let her solve her own problem. Prove that I wasn't just someone she could call when she needed something. Both options had merit. Both felt justified. I thought about the version of myself who'd sat at that engagement dinner, silent and ignored. I thought about the version who'd decided to stop trying to prove anything. Those two versions didn't align. One was reactive, accepting. The other was active, strategic. I called Lila back an hour later. I'll do it, I said. But I need full authority. If I'm managing this, I'm managing it my way. No second guessing, no interference. You give me the vendor list, the budget, the timeline, and you let me run it. Done, she said immediately. Whatever you need. I'll need access to all the contracts and communications. I'll need contact info for every vendor. And I'll need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. I trust you, she said. I wasn't sure I believed her. But I didn't need her trust. I just needed her compliance. Send me everything by tonight, I said. I'll start tomorrow. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with relief. Seriously, Ella. Thank you. I hung up and sat back in my chair. I wasn't doing this for her gratitude. I wasn't even doing it for her. I was doing it because I wanted my family to see me clearly, just once. And if it took planning a wedding to make that happen, fine. I'd planned worse. By the time I left the office that night, Lila had sent me a shared drive folder with 43 files. I opened it on my laptop at home, scanned the contents, and started building an operational timeline. Vendor contracts, payment schedules, delivery windows, coordination requirements. It was chaos, but it was manageable chaos. I'd seen worse. I worked until 0200 hours, organizing the information into a coherent structure. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan. And for the first time since the engagement dinner, I felt something close to satisfaction. They wanted logistics? I'd give them logistics. And maybe, in the process, they'd finally understand what I'd been doing all along. The wedding was scheduled for 1400 hours on a Saturday in July, which gave me 12 weeks to turn Lila's disaster into a functional event. I started by conducting what I called a threat assessment, identifying every potential failure point, every vendor dependency, every timeline conflict. In military terms, this was mission planning. In wedding terms, it was called being overprepared. The first problem was the venue. The contract Lila had signed was vague on setup times, which meant we had a 4-hour window to transform an empty event space into a wedding reception. 4 hours wasn't enough. I called the venue coordinator, explained the situation, and negotiated an earlier access time. She resisted until I walked her through the setup timeline, item by item, showing her exactly why we needed more time. She agreed. First problem solved. The second problem was the caterer. They'd promised a tasting menu 3 weeks prior and hadn't delivered. I called them, was told they'd get to it soon, and recognized the tone immediately. They weren't prioritizing us. I asked to speak to the owner, explained that we had a contract with specific deliverables and deadlines, and that I'd be happy to discuss our options if they couldn't meet those terms. The tasting menu was scheduled for the following week. Second problem solved. I worked through the vendor list methodically, identifying gaps, clarifying expectations, and establishing accountability. Some vendors were professional and easy to work with. Others required more direct management. I didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't lose my temper. I just made it clear that I expected them to honor their commitments and that I'd hold them to the terms they'd agreed to. Most people respond well to clarity and structure. The ones who don't usually reveal themselves quickly. Lila called me every few days, anxious and grateful. "How's it going?" she'd ask. I'd give her a brief update, nothing detailed. She didn't need to know the mechanics, just the outcome. Everything's on track, I'd say. She'd exhale with relief. You're amazing, she'd say. I didn't respond to that. Amazing wasn't the point. Competence was. My mother called once to check in. Lila says you're helping with the wedding. Her tone was surprised, like she hadn't expected me to follow through. I am, I said. That's wonderful, she said. I'm sure it's not easy with your schedule. My schedule. As if my job were a hobby I could set aside when something more important came up. I'm managing, I said. She didn't ask how. She never did. By week 6, I'd stabilized the situation. Vendors were on schedule, contracts were clear, timelines were locked. I built a master spreadsheet that tracked every task, every deadline, every dependency. I color-coded it, green for complete, yellow for in progress, red for at risk. It was never red. I didn't allow red. Daniel called me in week 7. Lila says you've been handling everything. His tone was different from my family's, respectful, curious. I'm just making sure things stay on track, I said. She mentioned you're in the Air Force. It was the first time anyone in the wedding planning process had acknowledged my actual career. That's right, I said. What do you do? He asked. I gave him the same answer I gave everyone: operations and logistics. He was quiet for a moment. That makes sense. You run this like a military op. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an observation. It's the same principles, I said. Manage resources, anticipate problems, execute the plan. Sounds like you're good at it, he said. I try to be, I said. The conversation was brief, professional. But it stayed with me. Daniel was the first person in weeks who'd treated my involvement as something other than a favor or a surprise. He'd recognized the skill behind it. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. By week 10, we were in the final phase: confirmations, final payments, day of coordination. I built a minute-by-minute timeline for the wedding day, assigned roles to key family members, and scheduled a walkthrough with the venue. Lila asked if she needed to be there. No, I said. I've got it. She didn't argue. The walkthrough went smoothly. The venue coordinator had the setup plan I'd sent her. The caterer confirmed delivery times. The florist knew exactly where each arrangement would go. Everyone was on the same page because I'd put them there. As I walked through the space, visualizing the event, I felt the same calm focus I felt before a mission brief. This was what I did. I took chaos and turned it into order. I identified risks and mitigated them. I built plans that worked. And for the first time in months, I felt like someone, Daniel at least, had actually seen that. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the night before the wedding. I wasn't involved in planning it. That was my mother's territory. But I attended because Lila had asked me to. It was held at a private restaurant, smaller and quieter than the engagement dinner. My family was there, along with Daniel's immediate family and the wedding party. Lila stood at the front of the room and gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support. She thanked her bridesmaids, her parents, Daniel's parents. Then she paused, looked at me, and said, "And I need to thank my sister, Ella, who saved this entire wedding when our planner bailed. I don't know what I would have done without her." The room applauded. My mother smiled, surprised. My father nodded, his expression unreadable. Daniel looked at me across the table, his gaze steady and thoughtful. It wasn't the recognition I'd wanted. It wasn't the understanding I'd been hoping for. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. The wedding day started at 05:30 hours. I was awake before my alarm, already running through the timeline in my head. The ceremony was at 1400 hours, which meant setup had to be complete by 1300 hours, which meant I needed to be on-site by 0900 hours to supervise. I dressed in layers, comfortable clothes I could move in, knowing I'd change into my dress later. I grabbed my tablet, my phone, 2 chargers, and a printed copy of the timeline. Redundancy is key. If one system fails, you have a backup. I arrived at the venue at 08:45. The event coordinator was already there, looking slightly frazzled. "The florist is running late," she said. I checked my phone. The florist was supposed to arrive at 0800 hours. I called them. They'd hit traffic but were 10 minutes out. Acceptable. I revised the setup timeline, pushed the floral installation back, and adjusted the dependent tasks accordingly. Problem managed. The florist arrived at 0900 hours. I walked them through the layout, showed them the diagram I'd created, and confirmed placement for every arrangement. They worked efficiently, and by 1000 hours, the flowers were done. The caterer arrived at 10:30 hours, right on schedule. I walked them through the kitchen setup, confirmed the menu, and verified final headcount. No issues. By 1100 hours, the venue was taking shape. Tables were set, linens were pressed, centerpieces were in place. I walked the space one more time, checking details, chair alignment, place card positioning, lighting levels. Everything was correct. I updated my checklist, all green. Lila arrived at 11:30 hours with her bridesmaids. She looked at the space and her eyes went wide. Ella, this is perfect. I nodded. Good. You should start getting ready. Hair and makeup are set up in the bridal suite. She hugged me quickly, impulsively. Thank you, she said. I patted her back awkwardly. You're welcome. Go. I had 90 minutes before I needed to change into my dress. I spent it doing final checks, confirming the DJ's arrival time, verifying the cake delivery, checking in with the photographer. Everything was on schedule. At 12:45, I went to the small room I'd reserved for myself, changed into my dress, and redid my hair. I looked at myself in the mirror, professional, composed, ready. I didn't look like someone who'd been managing crisis logistics for 6 hours. That was intentional. No one needed to see the work, just the result. The ceremony started at 1400 hours exactly. I stood with the family, watching Lila walk down the aisle. She looked beautiful, radiant, every bit the bride she'd wanted to be. Daniel watched her with an expression I recognized: focus, attention, care. He was a good choice. I was glad for her. The ceremony was short, traditional. They exchanged vows, kissed, and walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. The guests applauded. I clapped along with everyone else, my mind already on the next phase: cocktail hour, reception timeline, vendor coordination. The cocktail hour went smoothly. Guests mingled, drinks were served, appetizers circulated. I checked in with the catering lead, confirmed dinner service timing, and verified the DJ had the correct playlist. No issues. At 1500 hours, guests moved into the reception space. I did a final visual sweep. Everything was in place. I found my seat at a table near the front. My parents were there, along with a few aunts and uncles. My father glanced at me. Everything looks good, he said. It was the closest he'd come to a compliment all day. Thanks, I said. My mother leaned over. You really pulled this together, Ella. Lila's so lucky to have you. Lucky. Not grateful. Not impressed. Lucky. I nodded and said nothing. Dinner was served at 1600 hours. The meal was excellent, the service seamless. Between courses, guests gave toasts. Daniel's best man told a funny story about their college years. One of Lila's bridesmaids gave a tearful speech about friendship. My father stood, raised his glass, and gave a measured toast about family and commitment. He didn't mention me. I hadn't expected him to. Then Daniel stood. He wasn't scheduled to speak, but he picked up his glass and the room quieted. I want to add something, he said. He looked at Lila. You know I love you. Everyone here knows that. But I also want to acknowledge someone who made today possible. He turned toward me. The room followed his gaze. Ella stepped in when we needed her and turned what could have been a disaster into this. She didn't just help, she led. And I want to make sure that's recognized. The room applauded. I felt heat rise in my face. Daniel held my gaze for a moment, then sat down. Lila was smiling, surprised but pleased. My mother looked confused, like she wasn't sure what had just happened. My father's expression was unreadable. I nodded at Daniel, a small acknowledgement, and looked down at my plate. The applause faded. Conversation resumed. But something had shifted. People were looking at me differently now, with a kind of curiosity they hadn't had before. After dinner, during the dancing, one of Daniel's relatives approached me. The same uncle who'd asked if I'd ever been promoted. He looked uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize, he said. For what I said at the engagement dinner. I didn't realize, he stopped, searching for words. I didn't realize you were, well, that you'd accomplished so much. I kept my expression neutral. It's fine, I said. I should have asked more questions, he said. I made assumptions. People usually do, I said. He nodded slowly, then excused himself. The interaction was brief, but it was the first apology I'd received from anyone. It didn't erase the engagement dinner, but it acknowledged it. That mattered. The reception continued smoothly. Cake was cut at 1800 hours, first dance at 1830. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to, exactly how it was supposed to. By 2000 hours, guests were starting to leave. Lila found me near the exit. Today was perfect, she said. Thank you. I nodded. I'm glad it went well. She hesitated. I know I haven't been. I know I should have asked more about your job. About your life. I'm sorry. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a deep understanding. But it was a start. It's okay, I said. She hugged me again, longer this time. I mean it, she said. I'm really sorry. I hugged her back. I know. By 2100 hours, the venue was clearing out. I stayed to supervise teardown, making sure vendors packed up correctly and nothing was left behind. The event coordinator thanked me. You should do this professionally, she said. I smiled. I have a job. Well, she said, if you ever want a career change, let me know. I drove home alone, exhausted but satisfied. The wedding had been flawless. No crises, no failures, no chaos. Just execution. That was what I did. That was who I was. And for the first time, some of them had actually seen it. I thought the recognition would fade quickly. That Daniel's toast and Lila's apology would dissolve into the background, forgotten within days like most wedding moments. But something had changed, and it didn't disappear as fast as I expected. My mother called 2 days after the wedding. People are still talking about how well everything went, she said. Several guests asked who the wedding planner was. They were shocked when I said it was you. Shocked. The word hung in the air. Why shocked? I asked, though I knew the answer. Well, she said carefully, they just didn't realize you had those kinds of skills. I let the silence stretch. She filled it. I didn't either, honestly. I knew you were organized, but this was different. Different. Better than expected. Better than she'd assumed I was capable of. I do this kind of work all the time, I said. Just not for weddings. Right, she said. Your military thing. Your military thing. Still. Even after everything. It's not a thing, Mom. It's my career. I know that, she said, defensive now. I just meant I know what you meant, I said. The conversation ended shortly after. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. But she did call again a week later, asking if I'd be available for Sunday dinner. Your father wants to talk to you, she said. That was unusual. My father didn't initiate conversations unless he wanted something or needed to deliver information. About what? I asked. Just come, she said. It'll be nice to see you. I agreed, warily. The dinner was at their house, the same house I'd grown up in. Lila and Daniel were there too, which meant this wasn't just a casual family meal. This was planned. I arrived at 1700 hours, exactly on time. My mother greeted me at the door, overly warm. Ella, I'm so glad you came. My father was in the living room, reading a newspaper. He looked up when I entered. Ella. Dad. Sit down. I sat. Lila and Daniel arrived 10 minutes later. We ate dinner with small talk, the honeymoon, work updates, safe topics. Then, over dessert, my father set down his fork and looked at me. Daniel mentioned you're a captain, he said. I met his gaze. That's right. How long have you been a captain? For years. He frowned slightly. That's a significant rank. Yes. Why didn't you mention it? The question was absurd. I'd mentioned it dozens of times. He'd never paid attention. I did, I said. Multiple times. I don't recall that, he said. My mother jumped in. I'm sure you did, honey. We must have forgotten. Forgotten. As if my rank were a trivial detail, easy to overlook. It's not something you forget, I said. It's my job. My father leaned back in his chair. You never explained what you actually do. You never asked. The room went quiet. Lila looked uncomfortable. Daniel watched carefully, his expression neutral but attentive. My mother started to say something, but my father held up a hand. Fair enough, he said. I'm asking now. I considered walking out. I considered telling him it was too late, that if he'd cared, he would have asked years ago. But I also saw an opportunity, small and fragile, to correct the record. I'm an operations officer, I said. I plan and coordinate missions, manage logistics, lead teams. My call sign is Reaper 6. I earned it during a joint training exercise when a mission went off plan, and I coordinated a real-time response across multiple units. My father's expression shifted slightly. Not quite respect, but attention. Real attention. That's impressive, he said. It was the first time he'd said anything like that about my career. Ever. Thank you, I said. Why didn't you tell us this before, he asked. I did, I said again. You didn't listen. Another silence. My mother looked pained. Lila stared at her plate. Daniel spoke, his voice calm. For what it's worth, Reaper 6 is a significant designation. It's not something handed out lightly. My father looked at him. You've heard of it? I've heard of operations where that call sign was involved, Daniel said. It carries weight. My father turned back to me, reassessing. You never said. I'm saying it now, I said. The conversation moved on after that, shifting to safer topics. But something had cracked open. My father asked a few more questions about my work, basic things he should have known years ago. I answered them, concise and factual. He listened. It wasn't a transformation. It wasn't a revelation. But it was a start. After dinner, Daniel asked if he could talk to me privately. We stepped outside onto the back porch. The evening was warm, the sky fading to dusk. I wanted to apologize, he said. I frowned. For what? For not saying something at the engagement dinner. I knew something was off, but I didn't have enough context to intervene. I should have asked questions sooner. You didn't know me, I said. I didn't need to know you to recognize disrespect, he said. And I should have called it out. I studied him. He was serious, his posture straight, his expression earnest. Why does this matter to you? I asked. Because I've worked with people like you, he said. People who do the job, who lead quietly, who don't demand recognition. And I've seen how often they get overlooked. It's not right. It's not your responsibility to fix it, I said. Maybe not, he said. But I can at least acknowledge it. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, for what it's worth, Lila knows she messed up. She's been talking about it since the wedding. She feels bad. She should, I said. He didn't argue. She's trying, he said. That's something. It's a start, I said. He nodded. That's all any of us can ask for. A start. I left shortly after, driving home with a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, mostly. The truth was out now, at least partially. My family knew what I did, what I'd accomplished, who I actually was. It hadn't come from me pleading my case or demanding recognition. It had come from Daniel, from the wedding, from circumstances that forced them to see me clearly. But I also felt something like disappointment. Because it shouldn't have taken all of this. It shouldn't have required a crisis, a wedding, and a third party's validation for them to take me seriously. It should have been enough that I'd told them repeatedly over years. It should have been enough that I was their daughter, their sister. But it wasn't. And now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. The weeks after the dinner passed quietly. My life returned to its usual rhythm: work, training, deployments. The difference was that my family started reaching out more often. My mother called weekly instead of monthly. My father sent occasional emails, asking about work in ways that suggested he was actually listening to the answers. Lila texted more frequently, asking how I was, what I was doing, whether I wanted to get coffee. I responded cautiously. I didn't trust the change yet. People don't shift that quickly without reason, and I wasn't convinced the reason was genuine understanding versus guilt or social pressure. But I gave them space to prove themselves because closing the door completely felt premature. In early September, I got orders for a deployment. 6 months, location classified, mission parameters I couldn't discuss. It was the kind of assignment I'd trained for, the kind that mattered. I called my mother to let her know I'd be out of contact for a while. How long? She asked. 6 months, roughly. That's a long time, she said. Will you be safe? It was the first time she'd asked that question. I can't discuss details, I said. But I'll be fine. I'll worry, she said. You don't need to, I said. I know what I'm doing. I know you do, she said. And she sounded like she meant it. I told Lila over coffee. She looked stricken. 6 months? That's huge. It's part of the job, I said. But you'll miss Thanksgiving. And Christmas. I will, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I wish I'd understood this sooner. What you do. What it costs. It doesn't cost anything, I said. It's what I chose. But we didn't make it easier, she said. No, I agreed. You didn't. She looked down at her coffee. I'm sorry. Really? I know, I said. I'm going to do better, she said. When you get back, I want to do better. Okay, I said. I'll hold you to that. The deployment itself was intense, demanding, and exactly what I'd expected. My team performed flawlessly. The mission succeeded. I came home in March, 6 months older, 6 months sharper, 6 months more certain of who I was and what I was capable of. My family was waiting when I landed. My mother cried. My father shook my hand, his grip firm. Lila hugged me tightly. I'm so glad you're safe, she said. I told you I would be, I said. I know, she said. But I worried anyway. We went to dinner that night, all of us together. My father asked about the deployment. I gave him the details I could share, the team, the conditions, the challenges. He listened, asked follow-up questions, engaged in a way he never had before. My mother asked if I'd had enough to eat, if I'd been warm enough, if I'd been scared. I answered patiently. Lila asked what it felt like to be back. Strange, I said. It always is. Do you miss it? She asked. Parts of it, I said. The clarity. The purpose. And the people? She asked. Especially the people, I said. We didn't talk about the engagement dinner. We didn't talk about the years of dismissal, the assumptions, the gaps. Maybe we should have. Maybe there were conversations we still needed to have, apologies that needed to be articulated, understandings that needed to be rebuilt from scratch. But for now, this was enough. A dinner where they asked questions, where they listened, where they treated my career as real. That night, lying in my own bed for the first time in 6 months, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The engagement dinner. The wedding. Daniel's intervention. My family's slow, grudging recognition. None of it had gone the way I'd expected. None of it had been easy. But it had been necessary. They'd said I failed. They'd believed it, repeated it, reinforced it. And for a long time, I'd let them, because correcting them felt like begging for validation. But I'd learned something important. You don't need to beg for the truth. You just need to live it, consistently, until the evidence becomes undeniable. I hadn't failed. I'd succeeded in ways they couldn't see because they hadn't been looking. But they were looking now. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. And that was progress. I didn't need their approval. I never had. But I'd wanted their respect, their acknowledgement that I was more than the version of me they'd constructed. I had that now, or at least the beginning of it. Whether it lasted, whether it deepened, whether it ever became the kind of relationship I'd hoped for as a child, that remained to be seen. But I'd done what I needed to do. I'd shown them who I was. And if they still couldn't see it, that was on them, not me. I knew my value. My team knew my value. The people I served with, the missions I led, the work I did, that was real. That mattered. And no amount of family doubt could change that. They'd said I failed. The truth was simpler. They never knew who I was. Now they do. 10 years later, I made lieutenant colonel. The promotion ceremony was held at 0900 hours on a Tuesday in May, outdoors on the parade ground under a clear sky. My team was there, along with senior leadership and a handful of people I'd served with over the years. The kind of crowd that understood what the rank meant, what it took to earn it, what it represented. My family was there too. All of them. My mother sat in the front row, next to my father. He was 70 now, fully gray, moving slower than he used to, but still carrying himself with that rigid posture he'd never lost. Lila sat beside them with Daniel and their 2 kids, a boy, 6, and a girl, 4. They'd driven 3 hours to be here. Lila had called 2 weeks prior to confirm the date, asked what time she needed to arrive, whether the kids should wear anything specific. She'd taken notes. She'd put it in her calendar. She'd shown up early. The ceremony was brief and formal. My commanding officer read the promotion orders, outlined my record of service, and pinned the silver oak leaves onto my shoulders. I saluted. He returned it. The crowd applauded. It was over in 15 minutes, efficient and professional, exactly the way these things should be. Afterward, during the reception, my father approached me. He looked at the new rank on my uniform and said, "Lieutenant Colonel Keith." "That sounds right." I met his eyes. "It does. I'm proud of you," he said. He'd said it before over the past decade, but it still landed differently each time. Not because I needed to hear it, but because he needed to say it. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, uncomfortable with emotion as always, and stepped aside to let others through. Lila hugged me, careful not to wrinkle the uniform. "You look incredible," she said. "How does it feel?" "Like the next step," I said. "Not the final one?" "There's no final one," I said. "There's just the next mission." She smiled. "That's very you." Her daughter, Emma, tugged on my hand. "Aunt Ella, are you a general now?" "Not yet," I said. "But maybe someday." "When you're a general, can I come to that ceremony too?" "Absolutely," I said. She beamed. Daniel shook my hand, his grip firm. "Congratulations, ma'am." I rolled my eyes. "Don't start with the ma'am." "Can't help it," he said. "You outrank me now." He'd made Major 3 years ago and was doing well in his own career. We developed an easy rapport over the years, built on mutual respect and an understanding of what the work actually entailed. He got it in a way my family still struggled with, but they were trying. That counted for something. My mother appeared with a camera. "Can we get a photo?" "All of us." I hesitated. Photos weren't my thing. But I saw the hope in her expression, the effort she'd made to be here, to understand, to show up consistently over the past 10 years. "Sure," I said. We gathered together, my family flanking me in my dress uniform, and someone from my team took the photo. My mother looked at the result on the camera screen and smiled. "Perfect," she said softly. The reception continued for another hour. Colleagues congratulated me, shared stories, talked about future assignments. My family stood to the side, not intruding but present, watching me in my element. I caught my father observing a conversation I was having with a 2-star general, saw the way his expression shifted, not quite surprise anymore, but something close to respect. Real respect, earned over years of evidence he could no longer dismiss. Before they left, Lila pulled me aside. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For how I treated you. For how long it took me to see you." "Lila, let me finish," she said. "I was so wrapped up in my own life, my own version of success, that I couldn't see yours. I made assumptions. I was dismissive. And I'm sorry. I know saying it doesn't erase it, but I need you to know I think about it. I've thought about it for 10 years. I looked at my sister, 41 now, lines forming at the corners of her eyes, her hair shorter than it used to be. She'd grown. So had I know you're sorry," I said. "And I appreciate that you've shown up. That matters more than the apology." "I'll keep showing up," she said. "I promise." "I know you will," I said. They left shortly after. I watched them walk to their car, my mother holding Emma's hand, my father carrying the boy on his shoulders despite his age, Lila and Daniel walking together, talking quietly. A family. My family. Still imperfect, still learning, but trying. That was all I'd ever really wanted. Effort. Acknowledgement. The willingness to see me as I actually was. I returned to my office that afternoon and sat at my desk, the new rank still unfamiliar on my shoulders. My executive officer knocked and entered. "Congratulations again, ma'am." "Thank you," I said. "First briefing as an O5 is at 1400 hours," he said. "Wing commander wants your input on the logistics plan for the upcoming exercise." "I'll be ready," I said. He left, and I sat alone in the quiet office, looking at the commendations on the wall, the photos of my teams over the years, the evidence of a career built on competence and consistency. This was who I was. This was what I'd built. And my family finally understood that. It had taken a decade. It had taken patience, boundaries, and the steady accumulation of proof they couldn't ignore. But we'd gotten here. Not to perfection, not to the relationship I'd imagined as a child, but to something real. Something honest. They knew me now. They respected what I did. And when they looked at me, they saw Lieutenant Colonel Ella Keith, not the version of me they'd invented years ago. I thought about that engagement dinner, the way I'd sat silent and invisible while they dismissed everything I'd accomplished. I thought about the wedding, the moment Daniel had recognized my call sign, the way the truth had finally surfaced. I thought about every phone call, every dinner, every small step forward we'd taken since then. They'd said I failed. For years, I'd carried that weight, not because I believed it, but because it hurt to be so fundamentally misunderstood by the people who were supposed to know me best. But I'd learned something crucial. Other people's failure to see you doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. It just means they weren't paying attention. I didn't need them to witness every step of my journey. I didn't need their validation to know my worth. But having them here today, watching me accept a rank I'd earned through years of hard work and dedication, that meant something. Not everything, but something. I stood, straightened my uniform, and headed to the briefing. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. They'd said I failed. The truth was simpler. They'd never known who I was. Now they did. And that was enough. That night didn't fix everything with my family, but it made one thing clear. I'm done shrinking just to keep the peace. If you've been through something similar, I want to hear it. Have you ever had someone underestimate you until the truth came out? Did you walk away, or did you let them see who you really were? Drop your story in the comments. And if you want more real stories about standing your ground, reclaiming your worth, and letting the facts speak louder than the noise, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.